For me, 1981 was about a sense of powerlessness on the part of the overwhelming majority of people who lived in Brixton. And that powerlessness was certainly affected by the sense that people weren't able to work, they weren't able to get jobs, they were denied opportunities, and that's a disempowering phenomenon. But also, it was made that much worse by oppressive policing. Policing that used tactics of overwhelming force, policing that was very often racist, frankly. Black people were discriminated against in terms of stop and search and the sus laws. Black people were subject to frequent racist abuse by the police, and they suffered injustice at the hands of the courts. So for me, the overwhelming priority in 1981 was to have a police service, was to have a group of police officers that were more representative of the community in terms of their ethnic makeup, that didn't treat people with disrespect, and where they were disciplined if they failed to treat people with respect, and where they built partnerships in order together to create safe and secure communities. They didn't do any of those things. So when subsequently I did become a police minister, the minister for police in 1998, my priority was community policing. My priority was to deliver on the Macpherson report so that we had a police service that was drawn in terms of its makeup from a broad cross-section of the community, and a police service which exercised its powers of stop and search with greater discretion. But I and many others didn't just leave it until such time as we won political representation, until such time as we won a voice in Parliament, which happened in 1987. For us, we had to try and remove current grievances, and the greatest of those, in terms of something that ruined the relationship between the police and the public, and young black people in particular, but young people in general, were the sus laws. And so a group of women from southeast London got together and they started a campaign, a grassroots campaign. As it happened, they asked me to be their legal advisor. And the main thrust of that campaign was to remove the legal basis upon which people were being stopped and criminalized through an unjust law. And indeed, after the uprisings and the Scarman report, after a broad-based campaign that involved the churches, it involved all the political parties, at the end of the day, that law was repealed. So, you know, there are always things that people can do. It's not just a question about, well, what are the MPs going to do? What are the ministers going to do? You have to ask ourselves, what can we do to make a difference? And my belief is that people, by getting together, by being focused, by being organized, can make a difference. I think for me, Brixton in the 80s, and indeed Brixton now, was a vibey, multicultural place. You know, you got a sense when you came out of the tube, you came out of the Victoria line, that you were coming into somewhere that was different. And indeed, in terms of the music, in terms of the food, because don't forget, in those days in the 80s, now you can be in Bournemouth and you can buy ackee and saltfish in the supermarket. Believe you me, in the 1980s in Bournemouth you couldn't, but in Brixton you could. So we could get the sort of foods that we wanted. You could buy plantains, you could buy yams. There was and there still is a vibrant street life. So the market then was even more lively than it is now. And for someone, like myself, a young person who had been brought up when I was in the UK, in a place like Hemel Hempstead, where in those days there were very few black people, simply to be able to go into a shop and buy black hair products, that was a big thing. And you just felt you were part of a vibrant, international, multicultural community. And people got on. Black, white, African, Caribbean. It was in a happy place and a place where people stood together. And that's why when you look at the uprisings, we should never forget that white people and white young people were actively involved in those, alongside black youngsters. So it wasn't and never was a race riot. Americans could never quite understand that. I remember being interviewed on ABC and NBC and that sort of show in the immediate aftermath of the uprisings. And they thought they were witnessing some sort of a race riot. So you just had to point out, well, actually, that wasn't the case. And that there was as many white people involved as there were black, that this was a community that felt neglected. And we were neglected. Unemployment was high. We felt we were being unfairly policed. There wasn't investment in our infrastructure. And it was a cry of protest, really, about neglect. But the community came together. The community came together after the uprisings to deal with the fallout, and the community stayed together despite all the media interest and the sort of politicking that went on. And I think that's always been a good thing about Brixton. We loved it and we were happy to live here. I don't think you can compare what happened last year with what happened in 1981. 2011 and 81 were very different. Because at the end of the day, 1981 was an uprising. True, there was a criminal element that came along and got involved and tried to take the opportunity to steal some stuff. But it was an uprising. It was an uprising against an oppressive policing system, against an oppressive economic state, a depressed and deprived neighborhood where people were not being listened to and where people were not represented. And it was sparked off by a particular policing operation in 1981 and by the killing and wounding of a particular individual in 1985. 2011 was almost like sort of shopping with violence. There was an element of just pure opportunistic criminality and planned criminality. And I didn't feel that the economic circumstances and the circumstances of policing were in any way comparable with those that occurred in 1981. But from all such incidents, you have to learn one lesson, that something is terribly wrong. Now, I think it's a different thing in 2011. In 1981, black people were not participating in the economy. They were not represented on the local authority in Parliament. They were not members of the police force. There was no police authority to hold the police to account. Young people were disrespected and had nothing. It was a bad situation. 2011, something else is going on, and it's not that. But it is something. There is a sense of alienation, undoubtedly. There is a sense of a breakdown of community and responsibility, one for the other. And there is a totally sort of amoral approach to acquisition. It seems to be okay just to take if you can. Now, that tells us something about the state of our society. So we need to listen to that and to learn from it. And we've got to find a response that isn't just about the criminal justice system and locking people up. We've got to ask ourselves how we build stronger and more respectful communities, how we give young people in particular a sense that they've got a stake in society, but how we take a greater degree of responsibility for our own lives and our relationships with others. Because what was striking too about 2011 were that there were people taking part who had jobs, who had careers, who had a whole heap going for them. It wasn't as if it was a action simply by the dispossessed. There was something else at work that I think is very worrying. So we shouldn't just have a knee-jerk reaction and say, well, lock them all up. That may be, the criminal justice system has to be part of it, but we also have to ask ourselves, where as a society are we going? How can we recapture our sense of community and our values? And I always think too, it's quite interesting to look at communities that didn't riot last year. I mean, I happen to live in one, in Wembley and in Harlesden, where are also diverse, multiracial communities, where there are a whole heap of issues, but there weren't riots, and there weren't people behaving as they behaved in Croydon. So we need to ask, what are we doing right as well as what are we doing wrong, and how can we do more that is right to stop this sort of thing?